to an endpoint that makes sense on both a salt balance in the valley and also the protection of beneficial use in drinking water uses on nitrates. The thought process in this really is different for salts and nitrates. They're different constituents. They have to be addressed in different ways. And sometimes they overlap, but a lot of times you really have to think about them separately. In terms of our goals and what we're trying to accomplish here, protecting and ensuring safe drinking water is very high on our list. That's one of our primary goals, in making sure that we can figure out how to address the existing contamination that's there and try and speed up a way to provide safe drinking water for the communities that are currently impacted. What we've realized is that the existing tools in the regional board's resources, in terms of those existing tools, don't work that well to address existing problems. They work okay. We may have some problems for some of the groundwater and non-point source issues to deal with future impacts, but addressing current impacts, they really don't work that well. So we are spending time trying to figure out how we can come up with a policy that allows the regional board to get some immediate benefits, immediate relief to those folks who are experiencing those problems today. That's when we look through here, we're looking at the nitrate issues, looking at sustainable salt balance, looking at what does it mean to comply, how can we do that, and also providing regulatory flexibility. And I want to point out what the regulatory flexibility means. It doesn't mean that the dischargers get to do whatever they want. I mean, that term I think probably isn't the best terminology. It really is flexibility for the board. The board will continue to have their existing regulatory tools to enforce as they currently do. But if we can provide more out-of-the-box, more innovative ways to regulate and provide different solutions to the regulated community that might induce them to solve problems more quickly and do this in a more efficient and effective way, that's what we're looking at. So it's really going to be at the discretion of the regional board as to whether they're going to use those tools or not. But when you look at the basin plan today, they don't have the ability to do those out-of-the-box type projects that can provide real solutions now. One of the approaches that our favorite slides in CV Salts is this puzzle piece. Those of you who've gone through this process before, this update, you've seen this before, but we have some big policy questions, and those are the big puzzle pieces on top. We also have we look at this in various gradations, basically, from the big policy pictures to a more management zone area down to the specific area. And we continually go back and forth between the big policy questions and the site-specific archetypes and prototypes to make sure that our assumptions in the broad issues run true down to the site-specific level. And we go back and forth between those to make sure that it makes sense and it actually is implementable on the site-specific level. Similar issue that we have in the CV Salts, we have policy meetings and we also have technical meetings. And there's a lot of interplay between the policy and the technical. There are a lot of policy choices that are embedded in the technical analysis. And as a result of that, and there's also a lot of information we get from the technical studies that inform our policy choices and decisions. So there's a lot of feedback back and forth between the technical and the policy committees. So the policy committee, the executive committee, will ask questions of the technical project committee and ask for them to look at this, and we fund projects to get some answers to that. The technical committee could actually ask the policy committee, hey, look, we're not sure how to, this is a policy question. They'll punt it back up. So this interplay between policy and technical. Our accomplishments for this 2013 are, again, looking at beneficial uses and water quality objectives, look at implementation planning. We're not waiting to the end of this process to start implementing projects. We're trying to figure out how we can do that as we go along so that we can implement as quickly as possible. We're also looking at this cutting edge technical work and continuing to get oversight from the stakeholders in the executive committee. Again, this issue of protecting MUN, municipal uses, and agricultural use, those seem to be the most sensitive uses for salts. Nitrates tend to be more the MUN uses, but we're looking at that and trying to figure out how we can address these fundamental areas of ag-dominated water bodies and groundwater issues. Also providing relief for those impacted areas that are currently impacted, existing impacts.
I think I might ask a quick question. So
Yeah.
it's a policy level issue we're grappling with is how the anti-degradation provisions apply in the water quality standards. And I didn't see that bullet here. I was wondering maybe if that's a growth area for the
We talk
coalition.
about anti-degradation all the time. I mean, that's a fundamental concept of what does anti-degradation mean? How does it apply to groundwater issues? Are you looking at, I mean, we could spend hours, in fact, we do spend hours and days talking specifically about anti-degradation, how it applies to these problems.
Well, I think, I think we're interested in the outcomes of those discussions as well.
Yes,
But yes, good. I'm glad it's on the radar.
Without a doubt, it's on the radar. So yeah, we're looking at that. Yeah, again, this slide really is to point out that we have the salinity issues, we have the nitrate issues, and really pointing out that municipal use is the main driver on the nitrate side. Salinity, you have both agricultural use and municipal use is also drivers on that. So I think well, anyway, we'll move on because we've been taking quite a bit of time. The technical process. Again, we have a very robust technical committee that is staffed with some very good resources to come up with technical, to drive this and come up with some answers to technical work. We also have some subcommittees and groups that help advise us in this process. Some of those, you can look through the lists, include the regional board, and they're actively involved. Clay Rogers and Jeannie Chilcott, as well as Pamela Creedon, are at every executive committee, and they're actively involved in it. We get outside volunteers of Thomas Harder and Randy Hansen when we're looking at nitrate issues so that we can make sure we get input. We want to make sure that we have broad input on this process, and we know it's difficult for the environmental justice communities to be at every one of these committee meetings. When we know there's an issue that's important to them, lately, the last couple months, we've been dealing with ag uses, but when nitrates and those things that we're going to be taking up here in the next couple months, we reach out to them and make sure that we hear their opinions. Regional board certainly expresses them as well, but we want to engage them and make sure that they know when we're addressing those issues that are important to them, and try and encourage their involvement at the appropriate times and any time they can, of course. 2013, some of the processes that we dealt with, this is sort of a small list of what we dealt with. I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. I want to highlight a couple of issues that we dealt with. The conceptual model we dealt with over the last year. Incredibly complex when you're looking at the entire Central Valley. Here's our Central Valley. When you look at this, you almost just want to crawl up in a ball in the corner and just say, this can't be done, right? There's too many complexities in this. And rather than do that, what we've done is trying to divide the Central Valley up into 22 sub-areas and figure out, okay, how can we look at these in these sub-areas? Now, we're looking at both groundwater and surface water. We need to figure out how to combine these two models and get output from those models on both of those, which is very challenging on a technical basis. We also have looking at these two sub-areas as a focus in the Kings sub-area and the Modesto sub-area. We can't go through all the nuances of this, but if you look at this is looking at TDS and nitrates in terms of the water quality analysis in the shallow groundwater. The green, of course, is below the levels of concern and the water quality objectives. The red are more problem areas. So you're looking at TDS and nitrates. Another way we look at it is actually looking at assimilative capacity, which is sort of the opposite of that. But we kind of transpose the red, so the red is still the problem areas. What I want to point out here in the next slide, you can look at these broad areas and you say, okay, look at, there's the orange areas or the red areas. Those must be all have high nitrates or high TDS if we're looking at the TDS chart like this one here on the left. When you go down and you look at it more closely within one of these areas, you realize there's a lot more analysis that needs to take place. We're looking at the changes over the last 20 years and also at depths of groundwater. So you're looking at shallower and deeper levels. So you're looking at different levels. So it's a whole nother dimension to the analysis we need to take place. Within one of these smaller sub areas, if you look at the top left corner and you look at the 16 sub area, that's a bright red, that's a problem area. We'll go down to the right hand side. You can see that even though On the larger scale, it looks like it's all red. If you look at it in more detail, there really is probably not all red. There's some area that doesn't have a problem. There's certain areas that have a high, much more of a problem. Now, all of this is coming from data sources. You can look at the lower part that, we're interpolating these results and trying to figure out exactly what it looks like. So that's our best guess. But we know it's not all homogeneous within those sub areas, and we need to figure out how to come up with policies that address those differences. So we're looking at horizontally and vertically. It's incredibly complex. The same issue applies to TDS. Nitrates, Jeannie had this in her slide. I wanted to hit on it just one more time, looking at the problem areas. You see these particular slides probably fairly often in other forums as well. We're committed to coming up with ways to restore and protect the drinking water uses within these problem areas, and to figure out a way that we can do that in a way that balances the economic costs and come up with an efficient way to get that done and provide clean drinking water to the folks who are impacted for it as quickly as possible. And that's why we're looking at these alternative regulatory mechanisms to allow the board to make that happen. SSALTs is the implementation planning. Debbie talked about that. That really is on the salt side of it. What are we going to do with this salt? It's going to end up somewhere. As long as we're consumptively using water, which we want to do, we need to put the water to beneficial use. But when you do that, you concentrate salt. Where do we want it to go? So we need to have our basin plan set up that it induces those salts to go where we want them to end up, and not just happen to be someplace and realize 20, 30 years from now, oh, that was a bad plan. Now we can't farm, 500,000 acres of land that we really wish we could. So there's a broad issues in where we want those salts to go. Challenges for next 2014, these are the types of things that we're going to be looking at and continuing on the conceptual model and those other processes. Our work plan for the upcoming years. Outcomes. We're looking at updating the Central Valley Basin Plan to give the flexibility to the regional board to have new tools to regulate discharges in new ways that provide relief and solutions that make more sense in the short run and in the long run.
Can you just give an example of that for the people who are listening? It's been referenced a couple times. I'm not sure that's clear what we're talking about. The regulatory flexibility.
Well, some of the ideas is if you provide different ways to comply where you would, well, let's see, that's a long discussion. But what's that? Well, you could if you want.
Sure. I'll give you an easy one because I'm a POTW groups, so we're point sources. So
that would be a wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, thank you. And so if we have salts, let's say that we're over that certain number of salts, does it make sense to put a lot of money into reverse osmosis and that type of thing and take care of it, and you meet that number and it might have limited benefit? Or potentially, could you participate in a more regionalized solution that captures more salt, disposes of it better, has less net environmental problems that things like RO does, because it's a huge carbon footprint. There's a lot of problems. It's not the be-all solution. But without that regulatory flexibility, which we call offsets in POTW land, without that regulatory flexibility, the board can never do that. It's going to be, no, you've got to do this, and that's it. And so it's not saying, oh, yeah, you're not going to help take care of the problem. You are taking care of the problem, but you're doing it differently.
Right. So it's the multiple benefit approach, which is if you can
Absolutely.
spend less to get the same result and maybe get some other benefits or something good at the same time, it's a better way for society to spend its resources.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So we're also the anticipated outcomes complying with the recycled water policy. We need to address salts, nitrates, address the currently impacted areas for both salinity and nitrate issues so that we can deal with the existing problems, and also provide for the flexibility for the regional board to come up with innovative solutions. So we want to make sure that these broad policy issues can also hold true and be applicable in the area-specific plans as well. I think that's is our entire presentation.
Are you looking at the effect of drought, for example? I would call it climate, but it's basically drought and fire and a lot of the other things that can influence your region. Are you incorporating those into the models or planning or questions?
Well, fire I hadn't considered, but for drought certainly we have. In the Lower San Joaquin River Committee, which is a subcommittee of CV salts that's looking at setting salinity objectives upstream of Vernalis, we're looking at, you know, what is the appropriate objective for that section of the river. So some of the things we're talking about is, does it make sense to have a higher EC number during times of drought, so that we can, because everybody knows we need all the water we can at that time, and with the understanding that it would be lower when there's more water in the system, and that would over time actually allow you to maintain that salt balance, but not force a grower to salt up their ground during times of drought. It gives you some more flexibility. So we are looking at droughts and flows and those sorts of things to provide some flexibility within, possibly even within salinity objectives to account for that.
You're probably doing this already, but just wanting to make sure that you're involved in a couple of processes that are underway at the state board level. For example, tomorrow we're having a workshop on groundwater, and we have a concept paper out. So if you all have any comments on that, I think that it would be very timely. And then secondly, review of our anti-degradation policy. And I understand that's part of your analysis, but you know, if you have comments on any changes that we may want to consider in order to better facilitate your overall goals, would be helpful.
I do want to point out that Clay Rogers from our region, who also participates in CV salts, is participating in that process, the review for the groundwater anti-degradation. So we are staying very closely linked on that process.
Questions over here? As you look at your work, it's not as if this is the only salty place on the planet. And obviously, you have Kurt sitting there, so I keep wanting to turn to Kurt to say, hey, Kurt, what do you think? Just because Region 8 went there first and they found certain solutions. And as you pointed out, well, every area is different. So it doesn't mean you can slap a sort of off-the-shelf series of solutions. That said, are there any places either elsewhere in the country or in other countries that keep being invoked? So for example, I have no idea where they are on the salt issue, but in the case of drought, there's been a lot of discussion about Australia, since they have similar climate issues, similar mismatch isn't quite the word, but let's use it for the mismatch between where the water falls and where the people are, that sort of thing, to California. And so we talked, and they went through a 12-year drought that they thought would only last for 3. So they are instructive in terms of the places they've gone in response, which is handy for us, unfortunate for them. Is there anywhere around the world that sort of has taken salt management to what people see as a very advanced level?
Thanks. Early on in the process, during the policy meetings, there were quite a bit of review of activities in other areas, both in Australia, Israel, some of the other countries. As you noted, everything's a little bit different. Everyone's working on a different plane, a different economic level, and some things that make economic sense in certain areas may not quite make as much sense here, but it's been investigated. We haven't seen the perfect solution for the Central Valley, but we've certainly been looking to see which components are working and what made them work.
And Jeannie, I also think that we looked at some of the other state processes too, and some of their policies, some of their water quality objectives and ways to address salinity, those sorts of things. So we're looking at both state processes as well as other countries, and trying to figure out how it fits into the Central Valley. And again, when you talk about the Central Valley, you go from Northern California down to Southern.
It's
I mean, that's a
larger,
huge area,
more varied than most
and it's going to be
countries, yeah.
different in different areas.
Right. Well, I'd be interested in sort of maybe a discussion later examples. My guess is, if my history serves me, that there are areas that didn't pay attention to this years past that were once fertile agricultural and human settled regions that no longer are. So there are also examples that are noteworthy for their lack of action. So
Right, and I think, Carl Longley, when the state board and the regional board had their joint workshop back in, 2006 or whatever, that was one of the primary motivators for this, to make sure, salt is not we're not going to have a catastrophe. There's not going to be a drought emergency declared for salt buildup, because it's going to sneak up on us, and by the time we feel the impacts, it's going to be too late to deal with them. So it's really, I appreciate the fact that the state board and the regional board are willing to put their resources to this and really address something that isn't a crisis yet, because it's going to take a lot of work. It is taking a lot of work for this group. But if we don't do this planning and come up with policies in our basin plan that induce us to put our salts where we want it to go, we're going to end up with a catastrophe and we won't be able to fix it. And that's what we're trying to deal with, because you can't just say we don't want it here. Ultimately, when we're consumptively using water, salts are going to go somewhere. And we can't avoid that. We just have to figure out where is the least disruptive place to put them.
And I just, in keeping with your comment and others, but also this last comment, the strategic options will likely go beyond Region 5. And so I think that's something that we as a board need to keep in mind. It's great that all of this work is being done, and it's essential to where we move forward. But as you start looking at where is the salt going to go, there will be multiple answers to that, and my guess is it's going to be beyond Region 5. And so it just, I just think that's reality. It's politically explosive, but it's something that we just have to take on earlier rather than later.
Well, I agree and appreciate your willingness to do that.
great. We do have some public comments. Turn to them now, and then we'll take a break at the conclusion of this item, a short one. First, we have Omar Carrillo from the Community Water Center. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Marquez, board members. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Omar Carrillo, Community Water Center, and I wanted to. We've already provided comments, and we've been engaged in this process, and primarily Jennifer Clary has been part of this process a bit more than Community Water Center, but we just wanted to just mention a few things. As we move forward, as you well know, we represent communities that already have, salinity is an issue. Well, nitrates is an issue, right? So communities in our area have been impacted with not having, water to drink for some time. And anything that changes the rules, anything that could have an ability to continue to degrade water, as is the situation with CV salts, whereas CV salts is a game changer. It really, it's a very involved process. It's very complicated. It's very dense. Even we're having a difficult time being able to figure out how to engage ourselves substantially enough to be able to really make sure that the end result is something that really benefits the communities and doesn't continue to impact them in a bad way. So we know that there's been a substantial amount of funding that's been put into this program from the stakeholders and also public dollars. So we definitely ask that we don't create a program that impacts the beneficial uses and also currently beneficial uses that also definitely has an ability to continue to protect and not degrade. So we've been involved in a lot of stakeholder processes. We need to have proper data. We need to have proper public participation. And we can't create a more lax environment. So there's current conversations over the anti-degradation policy, which you're well aware of. Mm-hmm. And this CV Salts program has an ability to change that, right? So if we're at a process with the State Water Board, and then here we're having a different conversation with this program, then that's kind of when we start having an issue So once again, it's a very kind of two fundamental things, right? I mean, it's literally there's current, beneficial uses and also anti-degradation. That's something that we bring up time and time again. We continue to feel that the state has continues to. We need to do more. We need to do more, and I don't really feel like we're meeting the letter of the law. And with that said, we look forward for other opportunities to continue to engage and participate. I know this is an informational item. It's not something that's being acted on. We did participate in a regional board meeting maybe about a month ago where we kind of provided some not just kind of broader range concerns, which we're concerned with the program, but also speaking more detailed as to how the program could be better in terms of webcasting, public engagement, so on and so forth. So moving forward, we'll continue to be back here. We'll continue to work as much as we can. And I know that Council Pamela Cleveland had mentioned possibly providing some more involvement somehow from, to the EJ community, because we've had these concerns all along, and we still continue to have these concerns. So just letting you know.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting us know. That helps. Phoebe Selton. Hi. I know you, but I can't remember how your last name is pronounced.
Phoebe Seaton.
Seaton.
Leadership
it's an A.
Council.
You're going fast, so it's an A. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, might drop the A. That might make it easier. Following up on Omar's comment, I just want to emphasize again that we have been involved in the process. The environmental justice community and the coalition has been very open and has shared information, and all the meetings, et cetera, have been accessible. We are fairly concerned with any impact that the amendment will have on anti-degradation, on the kind of requirements of the state board and all of us to comply with anti-degradation policy. We are also concerned, of course, with the impact that any changes will have on beneficial uses of existing and potential drinking water users. Finally, while we appreciate that we do need to address the short-term needs of communities that are impacted currently with drinking water, we also need to be cognizant that we have to protect the long-term drinking needs and water needs of our state. Hopefully you all received the comments that we made on the scoping plan for the environmental document for CV salts. If not, would be happy to forward that to you. But again, those were our main concerns, and we hope that you all are cognizant of those issues as we go forward with environmental review and continued planning, and those are the issues that we'll continue to watch. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Great. Any further questions? Yeah, I'm sorry, Patrick. I meant to actually even ask you if you wanted to say something before, and then we got off on our questions. Please.
No,
Please.
not at all. Just going to say a couple words with respect to Phoebe and Omar's comments that came through. And I think that they are valid points. We are going to continue to outreach to those communities as we develop the Basin Plan Amendment. And I think Jeannie and the CV Salts group is very committed to that. For what it's worth, nitrate and salts are while nitrate is a salt, we are talking about two different legal and policy structures that we're rearranging to account for the uses in the Central Valley. With salt, it's a long-term problem. It is that kind of civilizational issue that we're dealing with. Let's avoid turning the Central Valley into Mesopotamia over the next 500 years. And that is a staggering size of that problem. It is something that also the board has a lot of flexibility with how it addresses those issues. With nitrate, the concerns are certainly more urgent and the flexibility is somewhat narrower. We're talking about what comes up the well and goes to the tap tomorrow. So I think we are a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more constrained in how we develop the policy solutions to that issue. Ultimately, we are talking about where and when we will address salt and nitrates. Currently, when we talk about the lack of flexibility in the basin plan, both the Tulare Lake Basin Plan and the Sacramento and San Joaquin Basin Plans, it has the concept that we are going to enforce these provisions everywhere, all the time, without exception. And I think that's an elegant idea on one hand. On the other hand, it might work if we had a clean slate to work with and we're designing California's water and irrigation and supply infrastructure today. That doesn't account for the years of consumptive use, fertilizer uses, agricultural uses. We have some of the most fertile agricultural lands in the world, and I think it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't design water infrastructure and policy and legal solutions to allow that to continue into the future as far as we can. That we also, on the other hand, need to protect the sensitive communities within the Central Valley. And I think those are the very difficult issues that CV Salts is wrestling with today. With respect to anti-degradation, I think that's mentioned a lot, and yes, we are. Everyone here is very plugged into anti-degradation, from the dairies to the agricultural communities to the POTWs to the environmental justice communities. All the anti-degradation issues come into play in the Central Valley. But to a certain extent, one of the keystone foundational issues of the anti-degradation policy is that ultimately you have to comply with the basin plan. So when we're tinkering with the fundamentals of the basin plan, which is what we're doing here, it's a bit of a circular argument that really puts us into the realm of what we need to do is account for the past degradation. I think anti-degradation is really good at applying prospectively, less good at applying to what has happened in the past. And, as comes up in our hearings very frequently, even if you design the perfect wastewater treatment plant or have the perfect nitrogen application for a fertilizer on your cropland, you might not see impacts to the domestic well that's your next door neighbor or the next door community for many years, if not decades. And so what do you do about that? Well, how do you address the concerns of that community that's relying on that water? Those are the tough questions that we're trying to answer here. And I think that relates to the overarching concern of the anti-degradation policy is what really inures to the maximum benefit of the people of the state. How do we design our basin plan amendments in the CV Salts context to really address what is the maximum benefit to the people of the state? How do we protect those sensitive communities within our Central Valley? And how do we also allow agriculture to continue and development to continue? And those are the really difficult big picture policy questions that we're going to be wrestling with over the next couple of years as we devise our proposed basin plan amendments.
Also, an example might be, in some context, the provision of drinking water to a community as an offset,
Absolutely, and I think
so that we get drinking water to them faster than we can under the current system. I'm just trying to give, for the people listening, what an example of that might be.
and the challenge there, or hooking up to a public supply or something of that nature, but the challenge there is to really make sure that if that is something that will apply long term, make sure that the funding is there in place for an offset so that you will have continued access and continued sustainability within that context.
And the funding and maybe the governance structure.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for speaking up. That puts it in context, I think, for a lot of people who are listening in particular. So this was very much a conversation between the expert public and to a certain extent, and that was very helpful. So thank you. All right, we will now take a 15-minute break. Please be back at 11:15.
ground information.
Well, not on. All right. We're reconvening at 10:50. My apologies to people who couldn't hear me. I'm really bad at heeding my own words.